Good morning, good afternoon, or good evening, whenever you're viewing this. My name is Darshili, and this is my presentation for the class Integrated Instruction and Assessment. The date is June 18th, 2026. My presentation today is going to be on my current reality as a teacher, specifically who just finished my first year. So the whole point of this presentation is this presentation is a big opportunity for me to reflect on my current teaching practices, beliefs, and mindset. Throughout this week's module, I've learned a little bit more about understanding by design, or UBD. Sorry about my cat. And I am beginning to think a little differently about how I'm going to plan my lessons, how I'm going to structure my assessment, and just how I can better support my students in this coming school year. The 5 questions I'm going to explore throughout this presentation are as follows. First, why do I really choose lessons to cover objectives? What evidence do I have my students are learning? How is my demeanor and attitude towards my class effective for student learning? This one I was especially interested in. Am I excited to go to work today? What have I done lately to relieve stress and focus on my mental health? I really enjoy that throughout this assignment we were exploring these different kinds of questions, because I think that all too often teachers aren't asking themselves these types of questions. So question number 1, why do I really choose lessons to cover objectives? Well, when I first read this question, I first thought, well, I choose lessons because they align with standards. But when I really think about it, there's a lot of different reasons why. I want my students to be engaged. That's one of the biggest things I was focusing on towards the tail end of this past year. Just making sure that, my activities, my lesson plans, my presentations, my labs are very engaging. I also want to make sure that it's relevant to the real world. The more real world examples and the more relevant I can make it to my students' actual lives and everyday lives, the more engaged they'll be. Whether they were really understanding a lesson in the past and whether certain lessons were more successful than others has sort of steered what types of objectives that I cover in my lessons, what resources I have available. All of us teachers are subject to our own limitations as far as resources go. Time constraints, of course, and then how interested students are going to be and whether they really need to know certain things or not. I'm a science teacher, and so I do want my students to really understand the things that we're covering, not just memorize facts. They can memorize what weathering and erosion mean, but I want them to be able to apply those concepts to real world examples like Garden of the Gods. We're in Colorado Springs here. I use that as an example all the time, where Pikes Peak is the big mountain that we can see from the window of my classroom. And so I'm constantly trying to connect and have them connect the concepts that we're learning about and these definitions that they memorize to be actually to explain how that works in the real world. And then some of the research argued that effective planning begins with identifying desired results. And so again, just incorporating unit by design and backwards planning, identifying those learning outcomes, and then planning backwards through that. Question 2, what evidence do I have my students are learning? I use a lot of different things. I love my warm-ups and I love my exit tickets. I think that it structures the class very well. My students know exactly what to expect when they're walking into Mr. Shealy's classroom. And I can also use those as a form of formative assessment to assess whether or not they're understanding what I want them to understand. Lab activities, so lab sheets at the end of labs, that I will of course grade, and that will give me a good indication of whether or not they're learning what I want them to learn. Quizzes and tests, of course, I am moving a little bit away from that. There's a big push at my school for project-based learning right now. So projects and presentations are a great indicator of whether or not they're learning. And then class discussions and then student questions and conversations. I really try and use the Socratic method in my classroom. I like to start with big questions and sort of open up the floor and just start a discussion. And hopefully we can learn through discovery and not just direct instruction. What I'm looking for in all of these is that students can explain the concepts in their own words, they can make connections between ideas, and that they're applying the learning to new situations or maybe even situations that I gave them, and that they can actually justify their reasoning. So I love CER responses, claim evidence reasoning. That's always a good way for me to give my students an opportunity to explain their understanding in these different ways. So I've learned that, high quiz scores don't always equal understanding. Some of the strongest evidence I've found is when students can accurately explain what they've been learning in their own words in class discussions and connect them to real phenomena. Again, the research emphasized that understanding is demonstrated through explanation and transfer. So students who can apply learning to new situations show a deeper understanding than students who can simply recall information, of course. Next question, how is my demeanor and attitude towards my class effective for student learning? I love this question. I really pride myself on maintaining a calm, positive, and supportive classroom environment. I was in the restaurant industry for years and years before I became a teacher, and so that is to say that I am a people person. So I really prioritize my relationships and my ability to cultivate a calming and inclusive classroom environment. Why this benefits my students is because, when I'm playing lo-fi, that's not just to create a calming environment for them, it's also for me. It's because as a teacher, you're responsible for sometimes 30 plus nervous systems at a time. And so I want to make sure that I'm regulating my own nervous system so that I can properly help regulate theirs. And so making sure that, I like to use dim lighting when possible. I like to play lo-fi in the background. I, make sure that I'm taking care of myself, which is another question that we'll get to in just a second. All of that allows me to then provide a calming energy that rubs off on my students. This benefits my students because of consistency. They know what to expect, again, when they're walking into Mr. Shealy's classroom. They know that they're going to sit down and grab their warm-up. They know that there's going to be calming music playing. They know that the lights aren't going to be bright. They're not going to have bright fluorescent LED lighting just spiking their cortisol levels. They know that I'm going to be patient all the time. They know that I prioritize respect above most else in my classroom. And they know that I'm going to be approachable, at least as much as I possibly can be at all times. And then I'm always enthusiastic. I'm always excited about science. I love science, and my hope is that rubs off on them. One of my strengths, like I said, is building relationships, and so I genuinely enjoy getting to know them. I believe students are going to be way more willing to participate, ask questions, and take risks when they feel respected and supported. Again, some of the research showed that teacher identity is shaped by beliefs, values, experiences, and relationships. And so a teacher's identity is going to influence classroom decisions and interactions with students. I love music, and so I try and incorporate music into my classroom whenever possible. Am I excited to go to work today? Yes. Short answer, absolutely. Most days I am genuinely excited to go to work. Unless maybe I didn't plan enough, then maybe I'm a little nervous, but we have all been there. Why am I always excited to go to work? Because I love teaching and I love science. I love that every day is different. It's a dynamic job. You never know what to expect. It keeps you on your toes. I love that. I love working with teenagers. They're hilarious. They keep me in touch with, current events, and it's just every day is different. It's always interesting. I also really enjoy helping students understand difficult concepts. I love that feeling. I think anybody who has taught before knows that feeling when they see the light bulb go off in a student's head after you explain something in just the right way. It's extremely rewarding. And then I also just love building relationships. I love that I get to have a positive impact on my students' trajectory in life. I'm having a positive impact on my community as a whole through what I'm doing through teaching, and that is extremely rewarding. So while teaching has its challenges, I rarely wake up dreading work, if ever, really. I feel very fortunate to have a profession where I can have a huge positive impact on my community through my students. And no, seriously, I really love teaching. Just really liked this slide, and so I threw another one in here. A few things that get me out of bed in the morning is thinking about my students growing, positive relationships with my students. Maybe I planned a really awesome hands-on lab or something that I'm excited about. I love when I can see my students gaining confidence throughout the class. I love seeing students make connections, like I said, and just having a positive impact. It's a unique profession that really you have an opportunity every single day to have a big positive outcome just in the world, and that's amazing. Last question: what have I done lately to relieve stress and focus on my mental health? Well, my personal teaching philosophy is that if if you don't have your mind right as a teacher, you're not going to be able to show up properly. And so you can have the best lesson plan ever. You can have a 10 out of 10 lesson plan, but then if your mind state is at a 4 out of 10, you're not going to implement it properly. Meanwhile, if you have a 4 out of 10 lesson plan, but you feel like a 10 out of 10, you can improvise, you're on your toes, you're enthusiastic, and it's going to turn out better for everyone. So sorry about my cat. You all right, bud? Okay. So, some strategies that I use: hiking and spending time outdoors. I moved to Colorado. Gosh, it's been 4 years now, and since then I have picked up every cliche hobby there is when it comes to outdoor activity and recreation. I exercise regularly. That's a huge one for me. I try and get into the gym every morning before school. Of course, this isn't always possible, but at least after work, it just makes sure that I'm eating right and spending time with family and friends, doing the things that feed my soul. I love snowboarding, mountain biking, and rock climbing, and then taking breaks whenever possible. I like to go for a walk on my planned periods as long as I have time. And as long as I'm maintaining all of these routines, because at this point all of these have become an essential part of my routine, then I feel at my best and then I can best show up for my students. So, as we know, teaching requires extreme amounts of emotional energy. You have to be so patient and you have to be consistent if you want to be effective. So if I neglect my own well-being, it becomes much harder to effectively support my students. And I learned very quickly in just my first year that taking care of myself is not selfish. It is actually the most selfless thing you can do as a teacher, because as long as you're at your best, then your students are going to thank you. So all of this got me thinking about how, as teachers, it's all about balance, just like with anything in life. Teacher burnout is so real. I see it every day. All of the teachers that I work with that have been in the industry for a very long time, most of them are burnt out. Most of them lack a certain enthusiasm that I have definitely brought throughout my first year. And so maintaining that balance helps me stay energized and maintain that excitement. So I'm learning to focus on what matters most and try, instead of trying to do everything. So 3 big lessons that I wanted to hit on is that not every lesson needs to be perfect. Like I said, if I'm at a 10 out of 10, I don't need the best lesson plan in the world. I can think on my toes and make it good because I'm at my best. Second, not every problem can be solved immediately. Sometimes you just have to give it time. And then growth happens over time, and the small successes matter. Teaching, like with anything, is a growing process. It's a learning process. I am getting better every day, and I've learned to give myself grace and have patience with myself and celebrate the small wins every day. What these questions really revealed about my current reality. Some of the shrinks that it revealed is that I have a positive attitude. I have very strong relationships with my students. I'm very passionate about teaching and about the subject matter, which is rare to have both. And I'm very committed to my student success. I have a growth mindset, and I try and stress a growth mindset to my students as well. Areas that I could grow in. Creating more authentic assessments. I just want to make sure that my assessments are not dry. I want to make sure that I'm providing multiple paths to demonstrate learning. That's a big thing that I'm going to work on this coming year. Strengthening inquiry-based instruction. I want to utilize the Socratic method more and more and more. It's not always the most effective thing, and I think that's sometimes just because I'm not using the correct guiding questions and sort of guiding the conversation when need be, and so that's one area that I want to strengthen. Increasing opportunities for student ownership, just making sure that students are taking ownership over their own learning. I want to incorporate more opportunities for autonomy for my students, and then continuing to improve work-life balance. I do feel like I maintain a pretty solid work-life balance, but I just want to make sure that I continue to maintain that. I think that it's really easy to lose that when you're really passionate about teaching. And then reflecting on this, some of the research that we covered in this module emphasized the importance of aligning goals, assessments, and instruction. So reflecting on all these questions really has helped me think, and I think will help me think in the future more intentionally about that alignment in my own classroom. Final reflection, throughout these questions, I saw that obviously I'm still growing as an educator, but I'm very proud of the teacher I'm becoming. I really enjoy going to work every day, and I feel very fortunate to have a career that allows me to positively influence my students and my community. Looking forward, I want to focus on designing lessons that promote deeper understanding. I want to create meaningful learning experiences, improve assessment practices, maintain my passion for teaching. I want to make sure I never lose that, like I've seen so many teachers do. And I want to continue growing professionally and personally and maintaining that balance. And tying all of this into UBD, learning about that throughout this module has really encouraged me to think more intentionally about my teaching and learning. And by reflecting on my current reality, I can better identify my strengths, my areas for growth, and then continue becoming the teacher that my students deserve. And here are the references. So once again, I thoroughly enjoyed this assignment. I hope that throughout my career here at Adams State, I encounter more assignments like this, because this was a really beautiful thought exercise. Thank you.